They called it progress. But when Union Pacific put jet engines on wheels, nobody was ready for what happened next. In the 1950s, with mountains too steep and cargo too heavy, they gambled on raw turbine power, 8,500 horsepower screaming like war. It did not just move freight, it turned bridges into puddles, cooked the asphalt, and left entire towns shaking. This was not a train, it was a force of nature, and sometimes nature fought back. So how did a locomotive designed to conquer the Rockies nearly torch the railroad itself? The Wasatch Mountains didn't care about progress. They were a wall, mile after mile of granite and sage, rising so fast the air thinned and engines gasped for breath. The grade east of Ogden hit 1.77%, which might not sound like much, but for a railroad, that was Everest. Every ton of cargo meant another battle with gravity. You'd stand in the yard at dawn, coupler gloves sticky with oil, staring down a train that stretched out of sight. 5 diesels lined up nose to tail, each one coughing black smoke, just to get a single freight over the hill. The old F3s and Alcos topped out at 2,000 horsepower apiece. That was fine for the flatlands, but here, the mountains sucked the strength right out of them. You'd lash 4, sometimes 5 units together and still pray you did not stall halfway up. The whole train would slow to a crawl, wheels screaming, traction motors overheating. You could feel the strain through your boots, the whole consist bucking and groaning as it fought its way up the grade. At altitude, even the air worked against you, thin enough to choke a man, let alone an engine. Summer heat made it worse, rails slick with dust and sun-baked oil. Every trip over the Wasatch cost hours, fuel, and nerves. Management knew the numbers. More units meant more maintenance, more breakdowns, more men on every run. Sometimes you would spend more time coupling engines than actually moving freight. It was a losing game, and everyone in the yard knew it. If you wanted to move real tonnage over those mountains, you needed something nobody else had, something that did not care about altitude or grade. The old ways were not cutting it anymore, and the bosses were getting desperate enough to listen to anything, even the wildest ideas. Nobody in the yard expected salvation to come from an office in Schenectady, New York. But that is where the letter came from, General Electric, fresh off a war that left them with more jet engine know-how than they knew what to do with. The pitch sounded like something out of a pulp magazine. What if, instead of stacking more diesels, you used a surplus fighter jet engine to spin a generator? Not to push the train with jet thrust. No, that would have blown the rails right off the ties. Instead, it would drive electricity straight to the wheels. A turbo-electric monster, powered by the same technology that had just carried bombers over Berlin. The first time the bosses explained it, half the crew thought they were joking. A jet engine on a train? You could almost hear the laughter echo off the roundhouse walls. But the numbers did not lie. The General Electric Frame 3 turbine was sitting in warehouses, built for war and now collecting dust. It was designed to run at a constant screaming RPM, 6,700 revolutions per minute, delivering a smooth, unbroken river of power. Instead of burning precious diesel, it could guzzle the thickest, cheapest fuel around. If it worked, you would have a single locomotive with more muscle than 5 diesels lashed together. The concept was so wild it made your teeth itch. Instead of pistons hammering away, you would have a continuous, roaring blast. Air sucked in, squeezed tight, ignited, and blown through turbine blades, spinning so fast you could barely see them. The shaft would not turn a propeller or push air out the back. It would spin a generator, sending juice to the traction motors on the axles. No more crawling up the Wasatch at a walk. No more tying up the line with dead engines. If GE could pull it off, Union Pacific would have the strongest locomotive on Earth. It was risky, unproven, a little bit nuts. But after years of losing to the mountain, a little madness sounded like hope. A jet turbine does not work like a diesel or a steam engine. There is no piston slamming back and forth, no firebox to shovel. It is all about the cycle, suck, squeeze, bang, blow, spinning at a speed that would make your head spin too. The turbine on the Union Pacific monster inhaled air through intakes big enough to swallow a grown man. That air hit the compressor where blades squeezed it tighter than a vice. Then came the bang. Heavy fuel sprayed in and lit off, turning that pressurized air into a firestorm. The blast shot straight into the turbine blades, which spun at a constant 6,700 revolutions per minute, fast enough that the metal blurred if you watched through the inspection port. But here is where it gets clever. Instead of blasting hot air out the back like a fighter jet, the shaft from those spinning blades ran straight into a generator. The turbine did not push the train with exhaust. It spun the generator, and the generator sent electricity down thick copper cables to traction motors on every axle. You were not riding a jet, you were riding a rolling power plant. The whole system ran at a fixed revolutions per minute, no matter how hard you pushed the throttle. If you wanted more speed or more pull, you did not rev the engine. You asked the generator for more juice, and the turbine kept screaming along at the same pace, burning fuel as steady as a furnace. This setup made for a smooth, endless surge of power. There was no lag, no gears shifting, just a wall of force that you could feel through the soles of your boots. The only way to slow it down was to cut the load on the generator. Otherwise, that turbine would keep spinning, burning bunker C oil and howling like a banshee all day and all night. The engineers called it a turbo-electric. It was a different animal from anything else on the rails. The constant revolutions per minute was both its strength and its curse. You could not idle it down to save fuel or cut the noise. Once it was running, it was all in, all the time. That relentless spin was what made it so powerful and what would later turn out to be its undoing. For now, though, it was pure, unfiltered power, chained to steel wheels and let loose on the mountain grades. The first time the prototype rolled into the yard, it looked like nothing else on rails. They called it the Green Monster. It wore the streamlined nose of an Alco, but the real giveaway was the twin air intakes, gaping wide on either side of the body like a shark about to swallow a truck. You could hear the mechanic's boots crunching on the ballast as he circled it, trying to figure out where the smoke box went or where the pistons were supposed to be. Instead, there was a long sealed body riding on 4 sets of trucks, arranged B, 8 axles in all, built to spread the weight and keep the thing glued to the rails. Inside the cab, it was all dials and switches, not a shovel or firebox in sight. The main turbine sat behind thick panels, spinning at 6,700 RPM, ready to deliver 4,500 horsepower to the generator. But you could not just turn a key and fire it up. Under the hood, a 250 horsepower diesel starter, just a regular Cummins, the kind you would find in a switcher, handled the warm-up. That little engine spun the turbine up to speed, got the oil hot, and only then did the jet come alive. When you hit the ignition, the whole machine shuddered and the scream started to build. It was not a whistle or a chuff, it was a rising howl, the kind that got under your skin and stayed there. The Green Monster did not just sit in the roundhouse, it ran hard. Over 2 years, it racked up 106,000 miles, hauling actual freight across the Rockies, not just test loads. Crews learned fast. The throttle did not work like a diesel. You wanted more pull, you asked the generator for more juice, but the turbine itself never let up. It ran flat out, all day, all night. The cab was quieter than you would think, but only because the real noise was behind thick walls, pouring out the exhaust stack in a jet of heat and sound. The first runs exposed every weakness. The turbine liked to eat fuel, and if you did not keep the bunker C oil hot, it turned to sludge. Maintenance crews swapped out filters and cleaned carbon from the blades. But the thing kept going. It was a proof of concept that survived punishment most engines would never see. After a while, you stopped thinking of it as a science project and started treating it like a real locomotive. The bosses saw the numbers, 1 engine doing the work of 5, and started thinking about a whole fleet. The Green Monster had proved it could survive the mountain, and the next step was scaling up. Bigger turbines, more horsepower, longer trains. But for a little while, it was just this one strange beast, screaming its way up the Wasatch and making believers out of even the most skeptical old hands. The first time a turbine idled under a highway bridge, nobody in the cab thought twice. The crew was just waiting on a signal, letting the machine run as always. But above them, the exhaust stack was blasting out a column of air hotter than a bakery oven, 800 degrees easy. The heat hit the bottom of the bridge and did not stop. It soaked into the concrete, worked its way up, and turned the asphalt deck into soup. Before long, the tar started to bubble. It dripped through cracks in long, sticky ropes, landing on the roof of the locomotive in black globs. Up top, a car rolled across and its tires sank right in, stuck fast in the goo. The driver had to be hauled out by a tow truck, wheels caked in melted road. Word got back to the yard before the train even cleared the next siding. Mechanics could not believe it, molten tar raining down from a bridge. Nobody had ever seen a locomotive so hot it cooked the road above its own head. Union Pacific scrambled to fix it. Welders were sent out to bolt sheets of steel under every overpass on the Wasatch line, just to keep the bridges from liquefying every time a turbine paused for a red light. The solution worked, but it was a warning. This machine did not just move freight, it changed the world around it. The heat was a living thing, and nobody, not even the bosses, had planned for that kind of power. The turbine's scream was the first thing you noticed, and the last thing you would forget. It was not just loud, it was a wall of sound, a high-pitched whine that cut through steel and bone. When that jet engine spun up to speed, the noise hit 120 decibels, louder than a thunderclap, enough to rattle windows a half-mile away. You could feel it in your chest before you ever saw the train. The locals called it the bird burner. Some said birds dropped right out of the sky if they got too close to the exhaust. Most folks just shut their doors and hoped it would pass quickly. Towns along the line started to fight back. City councils passed ordinances banning the turbine from rolling through at night. Some places refused it altogether, forcing Union Pacific to reroute freight or stick to the loneliest stretches of track. The company tried to keep the peace, but there was no hiding that kind of noise. It echoed off canyon walls, bounced down empty streets, woke up babies, and set dogs howling in their yards. The only thing louder than the engine was the complaints. The crews paid the highest price. Inside the cab, you could barely hear your own thoughts. After a few years on the turbine, most engineers had a ringing in their ears that never went away. I still carry it, constant like a kettle left on the stove. Back then, nobody handed out earplugs. You just learned to lip read and hope you would have some hearing left by retirement. That is the part nobody talks about. You did not just hold on and pray, you braced yourself for the scream. It was the cost of riding the most powerful train on Earth. Nothing on rails before or since matched the Big Blow's raw muscle. The numbers alone made your head spin. 8,500 horsepower, 12 traction motors, 2 hulking units locked together in a CC plus CC arrangement, and a tender trailing behind like an iron umbilical cord. When you opened the throttle, it did not just move a train, it shoved mountains aside. At their peak, these turbines hauled 1 out of every 10 freight cars Union Pacific moved. That is 10% of the entire railroad pulled by a handful of screaming monsters. On the Wasatch, where most trains crawled, the Big Blow just leaned into the grade and kept climbing. The engineer would notch up, and instead of struggling, the whole consist surged forward. No stalling, no slipping, just a steady, unstoppable push. Crews joked you could haul a 10-mile train with one hand on the throttle and the other covering your ears. But there were quirks. Try coupling 2 turbines together in a tunnel and the rear one could flame out. The front's exhaust choked the intakes behind, killing the fire mid-run. Even so, nothing else could muscle a loaded freight through the Rockies like the Big Blow. For a decade, it was the king of the rails, loud, hot, and completely untouchable. Bunker C was the secret sauce and the poison. The turbine drank it by the tankful, thick as molasses, black as midnight, and so heavy it had to be heated just to flow. The tender behind the locomotive was not just a fuel car. It was an umbilical cord, 23,000 gallons long, wrapped in steam pipes and electric coils to keep the sludge from freezing solid. Every run started with the same ritual. Fire up the heaters, wait for the fuel to loosen, watch the gauges, then let the turbine scream. The thing burned almost as much bunker C sitting still as it did hauling a mountain of freight. Idling in the yard, the numbers on the fuel log barely changed from when the throttle was wide open. Back when bunker C was refinery trash, nobody cared. But then the oil boys figured out how to crack it into gasoline and plastics. Overnight, the price went through the roof. Suddenly, every gallon fed to the turbine was money straight out the window. The books did not lie. The power was still there, but the miracle fuel was gone. The turbine was starving, and nobody could afford to feed it anymore. Today, the ghosts of industrial ambition linger in every debate over speed, scale, and risk. As we chase ever more powerful engines, AI, automation, and hypersonics, the lesson remains. Unchecked innovation can scorch more than tracks. Progress isn't just about what we can build, but what we're willing to live with afterward. Power alone never solves the problem. Let me know what you would have done if you held the throttle.